organise the 4th commemoration of the terrible disaster at Fukushima. There was the tidal wave, there was the earthquake, but the third part was totally human-made, so it could have been avoided. And what is in common with all of the nuclear accidents from 3 Mile Island to Chernobyl to Fukushima? There are 3 things actually. One is the devastation caused to the locals, how awful it is for the people whose lives are disrupted by this kind of an accident. The second, of course, is the radioactivity. And the third is the lies. The companies, no matter what country they're in, they tell dreadful lies about their industry. And they get away literally with murder. So we're here to remember the people of Fukushima and the people of Chernobyl and the people who suffered further back, the people who suffered from the testing in the Pacific, the people who suffered the nuclear testing in the Australian desert, and in so many places. The nuclear industry is bad news.
It's Australian obligated uranium that was in all 4 reactors at the Fukushima nuclear power station. And we believe that that's not good enough and that we shouldn't be exporting uranium to any country because this is the consequence of it. We have a community in Fukushima in Japan who will never be able to return to their homelands. If they do, it will be doubtful if those homelands are going to be free from nuclear contamination. We have communities in Roxby Downs or around Roxby Downs in South Australia near Olympic Dam, the world's largest uranium mine, the Arabunna and Cookatha communities, who are custodians of that land and who've been fighting that uranium mine since 1982, who are devastated by the news that their uranium that they tried to keep in the ground has been sent overseas and sent to Japan and poisoned other people's country. Same with the Mirarr people in the Northern Territory with Ranger uranium mine. They too are really saddened by this event. There are victims of the nuclear industry all around the world, and we have them here in Australia, and then we have nuclear bomb test sites, victims of that, and we have victims of the nuclear industry in the way of uranium mining in Australia. It has to end, and our trade of this junk commodity has to end.
Well, Australia's role is actually really important. This country is one of the largest exporters of uranium in the world. We sell to multiple nuclear weapon states, and Australian uranium was in all 4 of the reactors, 3 of which melted down at the Fukushima Daiichi site in 2011. The Australian anti-nuclear movement is also a really important part of the global anti-nuclear movement. Aboriginal people from impact areas, dump sites and mine sites have travelled overseas to tell their stories. An Australian defence doctrine still relies on extended nuclear deterrence. That is, we still, with the Australian government, both major political parties still believe that nuclear weapons have a role in defence policy. So we're quite deeply implicated in the industry, and the Australian anti-nuclear movement is obviously also a really important part of the global movement.
We have governments that don't listen. We have people who are suffering. We have people who are active against the nuclear industry. But what I do see changing is that people are not so accepting of the lies anymore. And there's a people's movement that is very powerful, largely electronic actually, but people are speaking up. And I think that the nuclear industry will not get away with positioning itself as part of the answer to global warming. That's the biggest threat on the planet that we face at the moment. And of course, all of the issues are connected. But the nuclear industry tries to say that it's part of the answer, and it's not. It's too dangerous, it's too slow, it's too expensive in every way. So I think that we are approaching the final demise of the nuclear industry.
The South Australian Labor government decided they wanted a royal commission, a very high-level inquiry, into nuclear power, nuclear waste, enrichment plants. They've excluded looking at the impacts of uranium mining, which I think is actually quite telling. I don't think there's any realistic possibility of a nuclear power station or enrichment plant being built in Australia anytime soon, but I really fear that it's softening people up and running the arguments for a high-level radioactive waste dump, either for domestically produced waste or spent fuel imported from overseas.